Ladies and gentlemen,
They say the next big thing is here.
the Steve Warnicki Show.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Steve Warnicki Show. I'm Steve Warnicki, and a former police officer turned author trying to repair the relationship between American citizens and police through the sharing of my stories and my latest book, From Boy to Blue. Also, be looking for us in Denver at the official book launch July 1st, 2 to 4. That's a Saturday at Metropolis Coffee Shop at 11th and Cherokee. I look forward to seeing friends, family, and even making some new friends there. So that's where I'll be. We'll have some limited copies, but buy yours now and bring it if you would like to have it signed. Otherwise, just come say hi. All right. So today's podcast is a little bit different. There was news here the last couple days about the Minnesota officer who was charged with manslaughter for the shooting of a man during a traffic stop. He's since been acquitted. That news broke yesterday. Yesterday, as in when we're filming it. You'll see this podcast here in a couple days. So it broke on the 16th of June. I want to give you a different perspective about this today. This podcast isn't me dissecting this case. I don't want to go through the case. I thought about it. I thought, let's just get a copy of the case. We'll go through it. We'll talk about the things that you haven't heard, and then we'll try to dissect it. But actually, what I think would be more beneficial for everybody is that this podcast not talk about necessarily and focus on the facts of the case, and we get into disputes about what the facts of the case are, but that this podcast talk more about the process that's involved when something like this happens that I don't think many people have any idea about. Why is it cops are being found not guilty all around the country? Because they aren't. That's why. And I would submit that you don't have the whole story, and neither do I, by the way, because I haven't been in the jury box listening to all sides of the testimony, because I'm not the district or county or whomever prosecuting attorney that has read the entire case, that has interviewed the witnesses and knows what everybody's going to say and knows of what all the evidence consists of. I don't know that. So I might be breaking a little cardinal rule. I mean, the cardinal rule of broadcasting as far as op-ed type talk radio and op-ed pieces is to have an opinion. I don't know what happened that day because I wasn't there. And I'm also not in a position to detail to you all the facts and everybody's account, their version of what happened, because I haven't reviewed that. But I can still say we don't know the whole story because we don't know those things. We're hearing bits and pieces from the media, from newspapers, from television, from Facebook, from people. We're hearing bumper sticker slogans. Well, that's ridiculous. Shot someone and got off. No, wait a minute. Like that? What? I don't know. It's so quick. People are just so quick to snap to judgment. So I'm saying that we only know bits and pieces, and quite frankly, the bits and pieces that we do know are racially charged at that. We don't typically hear a news story where the story starts off with race. Black male was robbed by an Italian male downtown today. You don't typically hear that. You don't. White guy was in a rollover with his family. He has a Latina wife and 2 children. What? You'd be going, the hell does that matter? All right, so, but you hear about police shootings, and it's often in the headlines. White cop shoots black teen. In this instance, it wasn't a white cop. So, you're hearing racially charged pieces at that. And as I talk about in my book, the people that will talk up front are typically people like the family of the person who was killed, the attorneys of the people who... You're not hearing from law enforcement. So we're hearing one side of the story. Now, if you're like me and you're a law nerd, and you have been watching courtroom shows since you were a child, starting all the way back to, Angela Lansbury's, Murder, She Wrote or something. Oh boy. Just flop my gay card out there. There it is. But Matlock too, right? Matlock's cool. Remember that? Remember Andy Griffith? It's cool. The Matlock. Oh, yeah. He was just all Southern and he was just up there. Remember? All right. If you're if you don't know Matlock, that's maybe a little bit out of your era, perhaps, something a little more recent. Any and all of the SVUs. Right? Okay, there's tons and tons and tons and tons of courtroom dramas, all right? Think back to the one that you've liked the best over the years. Tell me this hasn't happened to you. You're watching the court drama. They have a witness on the stand. One of the attorneys gets up, the first one, and interviews the witness. And you get done with it and you go, guilty! Guilty! He's guilty. Ridiculous. They got him right where they want him. This show's over. They got 20 minutes left. What's this going to be, an infomercial for Yoo-Hoo soda? I mean, come on. This is it. It's over. Right? You're convinced of it. And then they're like, they use this, you witness, dog, you witness, or something, it's a little flamboyant, just over the top. I have nothing further for this witness. And they sit down. Then the other attorney gets up and they cross-examine the witness. And by the time they're done, you're like, well, God damn it. What? Well, I don't know now. I thought he was guilty a second ago. No. Well, he just poked all kinds of holes in that theory. Well, who the hell did it then if it wasn't this guy? Right? So, but that just happens. I can't count. It's happened to me hundreds of times watching courtroom drama. And they do that over and over and over with a witness. That's what's happening in the world. Except you're never getting the cross-examination because the officer involved in the Minnesota case has plenty of people to answer to. In fact, he got charged. He went to trial. He had to answer to a jury of his peers. He had to answer to, in this case, the county attorney or the prosecutor, right? He's going to have to answer to the department for tactics. There'll be a department review following the criminal case to determine if he did anything wrong. There'll most likely be a civil trial after this. And I don't know the Minnesota Police Department specifically, but typically across America, there are tons and tons of boards of oversight that are going to have their hands in this and look at it. Some of them are going to recommend training and tactics issues. Some of them are going to decide whether or not he did anything wrong. In civil trials, It's a little different than in a criminal trial. So he's having to answer to plenty of people. We don't typically see the officer get on television and tell us what he thought. So what I'm saying is you're watching a courtroom drama, but after the first lawyer has cross-examined or has interviewed the witness, it goes to commercial and it never comes back. So you leave the room thinking this person is guilty forever. You never got to hear the other side of it. So those are the courtroom shows. If for those of you who aren't familiar with this Minnesota case, let me recap a little bit of the facts. Just so you know which case I'm talking about, not so we can argue about them. The complaint says that Yanos, as the officer, pulled over Castile, 32, after seeing him driving on the night of July 6th and saying that he looked like a suspect in a convenience store robbery days earlier. Yanez pulls Castile over at 9:04 p.m. In less than a minute, began firing the first of 7 fatal shots into a car. And then this was the one where the girlfriend broadcast live after the officer had fired, her boyfriend dying in the seat while she was calm. This is the one that went viral where she was doing the Facebook Live. All right, that's the case we're talking about here. Just because I know most of you have seen it. If you haven't, look it up. Because I'm limited on time and I don't want to get into there's pages and pages of facts. And the case is probably phone books thick, okay? So our system is set up so that who is it that's deciding whether or not the cops are guilty or not? Well, it's the man. It's the man. The man is doing it. God damn the man. The man is there. The man. Who's the man? That's what you hear all the time. The man's or you hear like, well, the cops, they're protecting their own. It's not the cops. Do you know who it is? It's you. It's you, the public. In one way or another, it's you. Our system is set up so that you, the public, get to decide. So this is how it's set up. that the people who live here ultimately decide the fate of what goes on in these cases. Now, there's other hands, there's other chefs in the kitchen, so to speak. So, I'm going to set this up for you. An officer gets involved in a shooting. Now, it is different. Some places have district attorneys that are elected. Some people have county attorneys that are elected. Some people have county attorneys that are appointed. Some people have city attorneys that are appointed. But the attorneys, the prosecutors that are appointed are all appointed by people that are elected. So mayors and governors are typically appointing prosecutors. So you have picked, through the voting process, the men and women who are appointing the appointees in these positions. Otherwise, as in the case of Denver, the district attorney's elected. It's just, he's got his own spot on the ballot, he or she. Okay? So you're picking the district attorney. A police shooting happens. I'll talk about the way it works in Denver. The police are going to respond. We also have a civilian monitor's office that's entitled to go to the crime scene and oversee the investigation. But who ultimately decides whether or not charges are pressed is not the police department. The police department is to go there, separate witnesses, preserve evidence, document, and present everything to the elected or appointed prosecutor that will decide whether or not to bring charges. A district attorney, as in Denver, will bring charges when they think they have a more than reasonable chance of winning the case. Let's say there's a really motivated, racially charged, highly controversial shooting in one of the areas. The district attorney's worried, this could look like I have a bias here, or this one's just too hot for me to handle. So what I'm going to do is hand this off to a grand jury. That's also a possibility. Now, I understand not every place has grand juries. While all states have provisions in their laws that allow for grand juries, roughly half the states do not use them. Courts often use a preliminary hearing prior to criminal trials instead of grand juries. Let me tell you a little bit about what a grand jury is, and this has been done before. These are usually 6 or 12 people in the federal system, but a grand jury at a state level could be 16 to 23 people. They serve for several months. They hear only one side of the case, the bad side for whomever is about to be charged. Because I never knew what an indictment. When I was young, like Bill Clinton got indicted, I thought it meant he was guilty. An indictment just means that there's enough to charge you, that there's enough to bring you to trial. That's what an indictment is, that there's enough to take you to trial. So the way they do this without a grand jury is you go before a judge and you have a preliminary hearing and you lay out your evidence, and a judge decides whether or not you have enough evidence to proceed. But sometimes you can hand it to a grand jury, and I've seen there's an old saying about grand juries will indict a ham sandwich because it's super easy to get an indictment at a grand jury because they're only hearing one side of the facts. It's back to the Matlock syndrome again. And I've even seen cases involving officers go to a grand jury that did not result in an indictment. So it wasn't there. These aren't cops. These are citizens chosen at random to serve on a grand jury that are only hearing one side of the story, and they don't think it's there. All right, but that's an atypical process, but it's a possibility to send something to grand jury, so I wanted to bring it up. A district attorney then says, who's held accountable by the people, I believe we have enough to charge the officer, or I don't believe the officer did anything wrong. We're not going to charge the officer. Those are the two things. In the Minnesota case, the county attorney said that there was enough to charge the officer. And he did. So the officer then goes to trial, and he faces those charges in front of a jury of his peers, just like anybody else would. Let me tell you about the jury makeup in Minnesota. It was 7 men, 5 women, 10 people were white and 2 were black. So it was not an exclusively white jury. It was not all men. It was not all women. And you have to have a unanimous decision to acquit. to acquit. You could have a hung jury where one person disagrees with the others, and then they have to go to retrial, or the attorney can just leave it alone and never retry it again. Just say, well, I'm never gonna get a verdict, but most likely they retry those. But all 12 people had to say acquit, not guilty, and that's what happened here. Well, why do you suppose that is? I understand that people are out blocking, and this, as soon as anything happens anymore, now I think there's probably a group of people who legitimately want to protest, but a large group of the protesters lately just want to go block the streets, whatever's happening. It's just like this started with the Occupy movement. Whatever it is, let's just go protest it. Let's just go block streets. So this jury heard everything, and they said, not guilty, unanimously. 7 men, 5 women, 10 white, 2 black. The cop's not guilty. Who decided that? It wasn't the man. It wasn't the police departments. But they're the ones that got to sit there and hear from the officer. We've never heard from the officer. They got to hear what was going through your brain. What was going through your brain? What were you thinking? What did you do? What did you say? We can argue all day long whether or not this man who was shot in the passenger seat of a car, who, by the way, was legally carrying a handgun, that he told the officer, I'm legally carrying a handgun, and the officer ends up firing on him. And at the end, the guy who shot says, I wasn't going for my gun. Those were his final words. If you're in the jury box, the only thing that matters is if the officer believed that he was going for his gun. And would a reasonable person, is it fair to believe, would a reasonable person believe that this guy was going for his gun? He doesn't actually have to be going for it. It's just, and did you give him a chance to stop? Stop moving, stop doing that. Isn't it reasonable to believe that he's reaching for a gun? In any case, not just the Minnesota case. Is it reasonable to believe, even if he wasn't? There's been other cases where people have pulled cell phones out and they thought it was a gun. The cops don't go to jail because was it reasonable to believe? Even some people have used to try to get suicide by cop and try to use a cell phone to make the officer think it's a gun really fast. And so, you know what I mean? So the question isn't what was necessarily the intent. It's like, is it reasonable to assume that the intent was bad? That's kind of crazy to think about, that's what we're thinking about here. Is it reasonable to believe that he was reaching for a gun? Not was he. Is it reasonable that he might have been? So what are the remedies here? Do we only send like racial officers to calls involving black? In other words, white cops can only go to white calls, black cops can only go to black calls. I think we got to take in not only the way the system works and that 12 people found this guy innocent. And let me ask you this, by the way, would you go into a jury box and would you let an officer go simply because he shot a black person? Or would you not hold an officer accountable when he shot somebody? Would you go into a jury box and would you say, oh man, that was totally messed up, but it's all right. We don't like criminals. Probably best to just kill them all. I mean, really? I'm sure there's people out there that might do that, but it's a small minority. And there's a great thing called voir dire where we check through the jurors to make sure that they don't have family on the job, or they're not officers, or they're not personally connected, or they don't have a grudge that's going to, try to influence the case. Can you think of the people that you know and hang out with? Those people, your friends and family, would they go into a jury box and not hold an officer accountable if he needed to be? Would they just not do it? I mean, I did that job for 15 years, so I'm probably off all juries, former cop. But I can say that I could go into the jury box and do what was right. But I have to know all the facts, and I have to know what the laws say. What is the officer allowed to do? What did he say? We don't know. And so that's my point, is we're only hearing one side of the story, yet we didn't get the cross-examination piece, and our minds are made up. Now, there are some remedies. Obviously, we're not going to send certain cops to certain calls, but Police departments typically have it written into the rules that the police force has to be representative of the public. So there's all different races and backgrounds on police departments. And technology is also helping in cases like Minnesota, where we have less than lethal. We have tasers and beanbag guns and pepper ball guns and 40 millimeter guns and all these things that are aimed at not taking the life of somebody who's not listening. But technology can only go so far. There are only tools in our toolbox, and officers have a plethora of tools to choose from, way more than years ago, and they should be able to pull the tool they need. And sometimes there's not time for negotiations or verbal judo or trying to talk this person down or negotiation, or there's not time for less than lethal, or it's, So what you have to ask yourself is, the gun's going to remain a part of law enforcement. It's going to remain a tool that police officers get to use. And sometimes it's appropriate because there's no other time or because things escalated so fast. We don't necessarily know. We don't necessarily know what all happened beforehand because the video started after. So I don't want to get into an argument about facts, but what I want you to see is that the system, made up of community members, heard the entire story, the laws, the rules, and what the police officer did, said, and what happened, looked at everything, and unanimously, 12 jurors unanimously decided he's not criminally guilty. He's acquitted. Now that that's over, you may think it'll be done. This case will go back to the police department. The police department will look at it internally to see, did he violate any internal regulations? And there may be civil lawsuits that come from this. There will be most likely tactics and review boards that look at this to say, can we identify training or tactics issues that might help reduce this type of thing later on? The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is if you want to know more about it, you got to go get the case. But what I want you to walk away from this podcast thinking is, we don't know the whole story. And unless you feel strongly enough to go get the case or to read all of the testimony, then I would listen to your opinion. But we don't know, and neither do I. I'm just telling you the system works in such a way where you, the people, are deciding the fate of the officers. So that's a unique take on police shootings. I bet you haven't heard before. As part of my healing the relationship between police officers and citizens, it's something to think about. The system we've set up. It's pretty good. I mean, it's pretty good. It doesn't work perfectly, but it's pretty good. I always want you to leave here with something like, man, I never knew that. I didn't know that. I didn't think about it like that. I'm not telling you how to think. The media and everybody else is already telling you who you should vote for and what you should think in every instance. I'm just telling you of stuff you haven't thought about so that you can think about that. I'm not telling you which way to believe in this Minnesota case. I'm saying you don't think you know everything you do, and neither do I. But I'm aware I don't know it. What? No, that was perfectly clear. You got it. All right. Thanks, everybody. We will see you back here over these very internet waves at Steve Warneke. Check me out at stevewarneke.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can subscribe to us on the iTunes store. We're all over the place. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being with us.